Please watch this video. If you watch nothing else, watch this one and every other video before this pertaining to what I'm talking about here. I'm going to just jump straight into this because I don't have a lot of time. And yeah, I'm just going to get going with this. These are not my theories now, these are my implementations, though I'm going to squeeze two theories that I forgot to put in the videos and print off at the end, quickly. Needed implementations in neuroscience. In my opinion, as a current, these are imperative and urgently need to be understood for the progression of this field. 1. Psychology, including clinical psychology, psychiatry, satiety, neuropsychology, psychosexology, psychopathology, psychosociology, philopsychology, psychobiology, psychophysiology, and psychoanalysis, needs to be recognized/regarded as a subspecialty of neurology. Just the same as audiology, the study of the sense of hearing, auditory dysfunction, and the vestibular. Neurotology, the surgical field dealing with treatment of auditory dysfunction and ataxic issues stemming from inner ear nerve damage. Somnology, the study of sleeping and sleep disorders. Neurosurgery, the surgical field dealing with treatment of abnormalities in the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And rehabilitation phonology, speech therapy, treatment of speech/vocalization problems most often used for cases of nonverbal development in certain autistic people, and in stroke survivors who have gained aphasia, a neurological disorder that causes either disruption to speech articulation, Broca's, disruption to processing spoken language from others, Warnick's, or both. And for this one, I don't see it at all as a controversial idea. Psychology is already counted as a neuroscience, and we know that it evolved out of initially neurology, neurological studies, and the field of philosophy in its entirety, more specifically ontology. In fact, early psychologists and psychoanalysts were doubled as neurologists. Sigmund Freud, Viktor Frankl, those are the two I can think of right now. 2. The psychological state, otherwise known as the emotional state of the psyche, and all its components needs to be recognized/regarded as metaphysiology. More specifically, it needs to be seen as the only metaphysical part of human physiology, the study of the connections between organ systems and other properties within our physical bodies, and examined as such. And in fact, in this regard, the only reason that it's considered metaphysiology is because we can't physically grab it. We can technically see it and feel it, obviously, with the, projection of the social element of our psychological state. But the only reason it's actually considered metaphysical, as far as I'm concerned, is that we can't technically grab it. It is physical, we just don't have the words to properly articulate it. 3. Psychological illnesses such as mental disorders, personality disorders, behavioral disorders, and addictions stemming from trauma and/or conscious absolvement need to be recognized/regarded as metaphysical brain damage, just as lesions, malignant cancerous tumors, neural death from an ischemic or hemorrhagic stroke, large-scale cerebral atrophy, etc., are considered physical brain damage. 4. It needs to be recognized that as of current, most people in the world suffer from some form of memory dysfunction. More specifically, a majority of the world's populace have fragmented long-term memory recall, or certain aspects of their memories have gone through at least slight cognitive alterations due to neurologic and/or psychiatric disrupt. It is already known that the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, the two regions of the brain crucial in short-term, long-term, and working memory retrieval/storage, are highly sensitive to both external and internal stimuli and are very easily damaged, along with the subthalamic nuclei, a nucleic area in the limbic system that's vital for hippocampal function, which has been observed to be highly active in people when remembering events related to psychological trauma through brain imaging. It's also known that mental disorders such as depression, dissociation, and post-traumatic stress disorder can cause dementia-like symptoms, and that personality disorders such as sociopathy/psychopathy, schizoid personality disorder, and Machiavellian personality disorder can cause memory loss in relation to emotional social connections. Note, this is not an excuse to dismiss or invalidate traumatic events a person has experienced, such as emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse or repression, affection or physical neglect, dehumanization, interpersonal indoctrination, etc., or generational trauma faced by demographics of people, such as cultural alienation or annihilation, ethnic dehumanization, religious degradation, genocide, societal indoctrination or oppression, etc. There's hard evidence that these things cause memory and cognition problems, just as in many cases cause, or at the very least are linked to mental personality, behavioral and behavioral disorders. I'm aware this implication could be used to manipulate people, unfortunately. 5. It needs to be recognized / regarded that as of current, 1 in every 2 people in the world suffer from some form of internalized depression. 1 in every 2 people in the world suffer from some form of social paranoia. 1 in every 6 people in the world suffer from some form of dissociative disorder. This number is only growing amongst younger populations globally as far as I can tell. 1 in every 14 people in the world suffer from some form of internalized aggression, and that most people in the world have heavy leaning traits of a personality disorder. 6. It needs to be recognized / regarded that as of current, the most common personality disorder in the world is histrionic personality disorder, and that 1 in every 9 people suffer from it. HPD is characterized by an overarching fixation on how an individual's self-image and personal identity is viewed by other people, whether within their own immediate livelihoods or on an external social basis, and the individual in question most often adopting a false persona to either keep up an appearance of themselves or to distance themselves from an appearance. In layman's terms, overly caring about how you're seen by others, obsessing over how they perceive you, and putting on a performative face to convince others that you are a certain way in order to appease them. Right now, the psychiatric field broadly considers egotistical personality disorder and borderline personality disorder to be the 2 most common illnesses when it comes to personality / persona psychology. And though I would agree that they are both majorly widespread throughout the global populace, I feel that there is hard evidence that histrionic personality disorder is overall higher percentile-wise. 7. It needs to be recognized / regarded that as of current, the most common types of mental disorders in the world are, as mentioned before, some form of social paranoia and varying forms of internalized depression. 8. It needs to be recognized / regarded that as of current, 1 in every 37 people in the world most likely have at least 1 small-scale lesion within the brain structure of the central nervous system. 9. It needs to be recognized that metaphysiological brain damage has the ability to induce physiological brain damage as well as physiologic damage to other organ systems within the body structure, especially in relation to cardio, gastro, sexo, andro, gyno, pulmonary, and dermato functionality, and that vice versa, physiological brain damage has the ability to induce metaphysiologic brain damage. 10. Needs to be recognized / regarded that as a current, 1 in every 55 people in the world have most likely at some point in time experienced a silent stroke, probably hemorrhagic. 11. It needs to be recognized / regarded that gained prejudices towards oneself and or their people demographic through societal indoctrination or assimilation, such as internalized racism, including cultural degradation, nationalism, colorism, texturism, and xenophobia, internalized sexuality stigma, including homophobia / homosexism, heterophobia / heterosexism, biphobia / bisexism, panphobia / pansexism, scoliophobia / scoliosexism, etc., internalized genderism, whether in relation to their physiological gender or gender identification, including transphobia / transsexism, agenderphobia, demiphobia, and generalized genderphobia / genderism, internalized sexism, whether in relation to toxic masculinity / psychologic patriarchy, or toxic femininity / psychologic matriarchy, including misogyny and misandry, internalized beliefism, including anti-Christianism / Christiophobia, anti-Semitism in relation to Judaism, Islamophobia, anti-Hinduism / Hindophobia, Atheophobia, anti-Buddhism, traditional spiritual degradation, etc., internalized classism, including stigma towards one's own shared community income ranking and superiorization of a financial class other than theirs, internalized ageism, including feelings of intense shame towards one's own generation, disregarding one's own intellectual capabilities, believing that they are inherently unintelligent because of their age, and inferiorization of one's own age range. Or internalized ableism, including feelings of shame towards one's own disabilities, inferiorization of people with the same ailment, and believing that they are inherently incapable of tasks, physical or cognitive, because of their disability, are all forms of psychological trauma and can be linked to the development of mental personality and behavioral disorders along with addictions and deviancy. Note, I make an emphasis on the concepts of indoctrination and assimilation, because I do not want to discredit individuals within different demographics who have used analytical / critical thought to form their own opinions on these issues, even if through their reasoning they've come to heavily biased or bigoted viewpoints. 12. It needs to be recognized that all forms of psychological illness within different individuals are caused in some way It needs to be recognized that all forms of psychological illness within individuals are caused in some way, major or minor, by the external societal structuring that surrounds their interpersonal relationships, including disorders that are attributed to genetic predispositions from DNA malformations and inherited genotypes from family bloodlines. We know that societal issues, specifically as well as environmental destruction and pollution, and also mass effects of stress and mass financial stress from the capitalist system that we live in, and also the absolute borderline poison of artificial flavors and foods, and just added preservatives that are put into our food supply by mass corporations to keep them fresh longer, or add an addictive type flavor, can cause prenatal issues in development of the fetal cell, in the development of the fetal cell, which can be attributed to development of autism, can also be attributed to development of ADHD, as well as also congenital sociopathy, and a variety of other psychiatric illnesses as well, and also potentially predispositions to depression, and also certain addictions. 13, it needs to be recognized that sugar addiction, reading addiction, generalized entertainment addiction, and movie binge addiction are real habitual substance dependencies with debilitating effects on those suffering from them in extreme cases. 14, it needs to be recognized / regarded that whether physical or metaphysical, any human activity has the potential to become an addictive behavior, and any product, object, or material has the potential of becoming an addictive substance. 15, needs to be recognized / regarded that all types of psychological manipulation tactics, including gaslighting, blame shifting, deflecting, guilt tripping, straw manning / straw lining, double speaking, coercing, dark empathizing, deceiving, playing dumb, begging, posturing, and grooming, whether used out of benevolence or malevolence, have the ability to severely distort cognition, most notably in the realms of critical thought process and ethical judgment within any person, but especially in those who have become normalized to abusive situations or traumatic events, interpersonally and societally. 16, it needs to be recognized / regarded that the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system, two branches of the peripheral nervous system, are both crucial in the onset and development of psychological trauma, especially in early childhood. I take influence from that from polyvagal theory in neuropsychology, as well as, I should have mentioned before, for my theory of mental dissociation being a reaction to environmental trauma, a reaction from the parasympathetic nervous system and the amygdala, and as well as the psychosomatic illnesses I talked about in the other videos. I take influence from the psychological theory of polyvagal theory for that. Where was I? Okay. 17, it needs to be recognized that there is no definitive age range for completed brain development, and that it is vastly varying from person to person, whether in terms of the physical, cerebral, limbic, cerebellar, and brainstem structures, the emotional state, cognitive / learning skills, or neurochemical / hormonal production. 18, there needs to be a reevaluation of how psychotic disorders are clinically prognosed and diagnosed throughout the psychiatric field. For me personally, I think that there needs to be a better criteria than just simply going off of, what has previously been looked at as being delusional without actually examining the patient first. Criteria I believe could be effective is, one, if you provide the patient with proof and that their belief is genuinely false and they still adhere to the belief. Two, if you're able to okay, I'm gonna have to come back to that. I'm too tired and too flustered for that, but there needs to be a reevaluation of how psychotic disorders are clinically diagnosed. 19, there needs to be more fields opened up for psychosomatic research, especially in different branches of fields, such as psychoaudiology, psychourology, psychogastroenterology, which I believe actually does in some form exist already, but it's not official. Psychogynecology, psychoandrology, psychopulmonology, psychocardiology. There needs to be fields opened up for the actual studies of psychosomatic illness across the board of the entire, across our entire physiology. 20. There needs to be a reevaluation of the clinical name currently given to the behavioral disorder of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, as there is considerable evidence that the psychiatric illness is not actually a deficiency in cognitive ability for focus/concentration, but rather an attempt by the emotional state to actually retain as much attention to environmental detail as possible from external neural stimuli. I regard the psychological phenomenon of mental dissociation as more of a deficit in attention than ADHD is. 21. It needs to be recognized that the psychological phenomenon of mental dissociation is a deficit in cognitive attention rather than just an alteration of external perception and internal consciousness. 22. It needs to be recognized/regarded that the psychological phenomenon of suicidality/suicidal ideation is a 5-step process to it that leads up to a patient taking their own life, that being major depressive episode, suicidal onset, suicidal actualization, a determining suicidal actualizer, the trigger, and suicidal confirmation. 23. It needs to be recognized that psychologic illnesses such as mental disorders, personality disorders, and behavioral disorders can and will to some degree affect a person's sense of morality along with their entire philosophical outlooks on life, and has been documented and researched in the relatively young sector of psychiatric study as of current psychology. 24. There needs to be a reevaluation of the effectiveness, the last one, this is the last implementation for neuroscience. There needs to be a reevaluation of the effectiveness and moral justification in using what's universally referred to as the golden standard of care in both clinical and private neurological and psychological health treatment. This can just go across the board for all of healthcare as far as I'm concerned, because the golden standard of care is used across the board by different physicians. There needs to be a real actual look at is this really truly effective for people in terms of getting them to be aware of their psychological disorders, and also in just the moral justification of I don't believe you can exert authority over it, but not actually pointing out the detrimental, terrible things that can be proven as being detrimental that someone is doing that has been influenced because of their psychological disorders, has an influence over their cognition. So, yeah, there needs to be a reevaluation of it just across the board of healthcare as far as I'm concerned. And I personally don't, if I ever have a patient with me being a self-employed medic, I'm not going to practice the golden standard of care, at least as far as I'm concerned right now, as I do have a lot of moral issues with it. But basically, a rundown of what the golden standard of care is just basically the physician does not make any complete judgment, even though they technically do, complete judgment on the patient's lifestyle, or they don't, they neither agree or disagree with what a patient does in their life or says, or how they behave socially outside of like their clinical like meetings and how they actually are, what they're discussing with the patient. I have a moral issue with that, and I feel there needs to be a real evaluation of that. Okay. Needed implementations in sexology. In my opinion, as a current, these are imperative and urgently need to be understood for the progression of this field. 1. It needs to be regarded/recognized that sexual desires such as necrophilia, pedophilia, amphibophilia, hebephilia, teleophilia, mesophilia, gentriophilia, abristophilia, necrophilia, masochism/algophilia, sadism, sadomasochism, picurism, incestuous urges, hematologia, partialism, voyeurism, acrotomophilia, fictophilia, zoophilia, objectophilia, food fetishism, dentrophilia, mechanicophilia, autoassasinophilia, biastophilia, neurotophilia, anthropophagolangia, you heard that, coprophilia/scatophilia, urophilia/urologia, etc., are not in and of themselves mental disorders and are in fact sexual attraction/orientations. However, they can develop within an individual as a result of psychological trauma, or more specifically, in many cases, sexual abuse, and vice versa, can themselves cause mental, personality, and behavioral disorders to develop within an individual. Note for that, that is again not a condonement of pedophilia, nypophilia, amphibophilia, hebephilia, or teleophilia. That's also not a condonement of unconsentful necrophilia. That's a whole nother discussion. That's not a condonement either of, well, biastophilia or, well, any other ones that can be questionable on here. That's also not a defamation, though, as far as I'm concerned, of masochism or algophilia or sadism or sadomasochism or picurism or partialism in and of themselves, or fictophilia, as they are not inherently, as far as I'm concerned, they're not inherently problematic and can be utilized for effective treatments of, well, psychosexual trauma, and also can develop within a person from familiarization to the actual, well, sexual desires. So it's those, and that's not meant to shame those there. And this is also not meant to shame anyone who identifies as being a furry in terms of that. And this is also in terms of talking about zoophilia, not a condonement at any sort of bestiality. So there you go. 2, it needs to be recognized / regarded that all sexualities and romantic types, including the ones mentioned before, and including heterosexuality / heteroromantic, homosexuality / lesbianism / homoromantic, bisexuality / biromantic, pansexuality / panromantic, omnisexuality / omniromantic, scoliosexuality / scolioromantic, androsexuality / androromantic, gynosexuality / gynoromantic, demisexuality / demiromantic, asexuality / aromantic, autosexuality, etc., can develop as a result of psychological trauma, more specifically sexual abuse or oppression. Again, that is not me calling any one of these sexualities detrimental, which they are not inherently for all the ones that I just mentioned for number 2. They aren't. But they can sadly develop because of trauma initially induced. So the sexualities are not the problem. The trauma is what is the problem, as far as I'm concerned. 3, it needs to be recognized / regarded that the currently unofficial sexology subspecialty of genderology, the study of physical gender and gender expression / persona, and its importance / involvement with sociocultural, psychophysio, sexo-artistic, etc. phenomena, is a real and valid field of scientific research and should be categorized as its own separate specialty, not a branch in and of itself, with the subspecialty of its relation to sexuality being gendosexology or sexogenderology. 4, it needs to be recognized / regarded that sex work-related professions, including pornographic performance / cam modeling, streaming, strip dancing, prostitution, telephone sex services, erotica writing, and pornographic animation / illustration, can be utilized as an effective treatment for individuals suffering from psychological trauma, and for those experiencing what I am doing to be the psychosexological phenomenon of connective sexual empathy. 5, it needs to be recognized / regarded that as of current, the statistical data concerning sexual assault / abuse towards cisgender men and latent, closeted, transgender identifying women worldwide overall is misleading at best or completely inaccurate at worst, as there is hard evidence that societally the incident numbers are far higher than accepted. Now moving on to sociology. Need implementations in sociology. In my opinion, as a current, these are imperative and urgently need to be understood for the progression of this field. 1, it needs to be recognized / regarded that every type of job occupation is a form of skilled trade. In terms of what a job occupation, in terms of job occupations, you are trading your physical labor, as far as I'm concerned, for any sort of profit, and also just to serve communally in any fashion. This is a skilled trade. As far as I'm concerned, even as well, cognitive trading in terms of sharing intellectual knowledge, in terms of teaching, or in terms of physical artistic performance of acting or writing of any kind, in terms of combining cognitive knowledge and also just in physical expression to some extent, and constant, well, repetitive writing, and anything of the sort, or in what I mentioned before in sexology of sex work profession, or as well as, say, well, what's another one I could bring up here? Well, in retail as well, we can look at retail as, well, again, you're trading your time and also your knowledge of, well, general layout of grocery items for what is needed by the customer, you are trading a skill that you have learned to some degree. And this applies, as far as I'm concerned, to every single, field of work. So every single job occupation needs to be considered a skilled trade. 2, it needs to be recognized / regarded that political ideologies can and will form cultural identities around their moral principles and systems of operation, as I meant to talk about in my theory of the inevitable formation of culture from ideology. 3, here I have another diagram for this one. It needs to be recognized / regarded that the spectrum measurement of political affiliation, the political spectrum, whether in the realms of identity, ideology, subservience, defiance, or influential sociological power, orients and revolves itself on the basis of a circular phi letter or fe letter shape, rather than that of a straightened horizontal line, a remodeling I'm dubbing to be the political phi / political fe. Named it that after the initial Greek, the modern Greek letter phi, and what was adopted from the Greek language by the Russian Slavic language, the letter fe. So here it is. This is, as far as I'm concerned, what the political spectrum in all actuality actually looks like. Let's examine it quick. So here obviously you have the right wing. This is far right, what I'm calling rising rightist over here, getting into moderate, where it's, I guess this could be called mixed views, but it's iffy. Then falling rightist, then down to center rightist, then right down to centrist, going up to center leftist, falling leftist, moderate leftist, as, in between of conflicted, I guess, in terms of ideology, rising leftist, and far leftist, and these both culminate in extremist centrist, which it then travels upward this way. And in between the moderate areas here and rising and falling of centrist, we have an upper gray area of moral principles and ideological beliefs, and then a lower gray area here of more of a clashing of all of them. Now, before anyone goes on and says, no, people who are on technically the far left are really just subtle rightists who don't realize that they are right-winged, and that it's not actual true leftism. I disagree with that, as there still are, in terms of far-right principles, I would be fair to say, distinctive actual ideals that are separate from far-rightist, or far-rightism overall. And I feel that, and it's also, again, close to what extremist centrists could be considered as well. Not even so much as a mix of both technically, but employing more authoritarian, like blatant authoritarian tactics. So as far as I'm concerned, this is what the actual, how in realistic terms the political spectrum looks like. And yes, I draw influence for this design from horseshoe theory, which is a theory in political science that the political spectrum more so bends like a horseshoe, center being more so at the top curvature, with far right being bending closer down towards here, and then far right down over here, not completely meeting, but getting very close in terms of ideological similarities, in terms of methodology and how they're acted upon by those who follow in the ideologies and philosophies. But I took it a step further and feel that it definitely does get into territory of blending and mixing at the upper gray area, which I will discuss in just a sec. And oh yeah, I should, here, I'll hold it here for a minute or a second just so that you can pause it and take a look for yourself, get oriented with it. All right. 4. It needs to be recognized / regarded that the ecopolitical ideology of capitalism is a form of fascism. As of current, most readily functioning under the principles of neoliberalism, neoliberal fascism, pseudo-feudalism, pseudo-segregation, consumerism, commercialism, neo-advertisement agendaism, neo-commercialist advertism, I'll explain what those are in a second, materialism, corporate expansionism, mass gentrification, mass privatization, pseudo-totalitarianism, and objectivism, and the governmental political ideology of republicanism, as of current, most readily functioning under the principles of pseudo-patriotism, nationalism, parliamentarianism, partisanism, bipartisanism, community policing, pseudo-segregation again, protectionism, traditionalism, countercultural suppression, mass political agendaism, and alt-rightism, is a form of upper political gray area authoritarianism, rather than categorizing them as separate ideological systems, with both primarily operating under the illusion of democracy, progressivism, and conservatism. So, in explaining this, as far as I'm concerned, capitalism is a branch of fascism. It isn't a separate rightist ideology in terms of the right wing. It is in conjoinment with fascism on its basic principles. I don't know whether, considering Adam Smith just outlined the initial ideals of capitalism, I have no clue what his motives behind writing, behind his writings were, if it was just subtle indoctrination to the fascistic ideal, or if he just, his major cognitive dissidence got in the way. But in any way, as far as I'm concerned, let me define fascism. Fascism is the ecopolitical ideology, basically, of operating on a securitization and, hierarchy of financial wealth and class system, also accompanying that of blatant ethnic discrimination and ethnic segregation, away from using class subjugation as a part of that means. And that's in blatant fascism. And going a step further is into other forms of fascism, Nazism, neo-Nazism, and Hitlerianism, all the sorts, could culminate in ethnic cleansing and cultural genocide and actual demographic murder, mass murder, and genocide. And capitalism, right alongside this, as far as I'm concerned, it is it is a ideology that is rooted upon the separation. It is the securitization of the business class, or the upper class of the financial marketeers, and also business owners, over that of the proletarian and the working class. It serves for privatization and complete gain of wealth for those who do start so-called their own individual businesses, and allows in its original principles, in the principles of capitalism, for mass profit and rights to privatization of land, and also rights to mass expansionism for said privatization of land, as well as utilizing methods of gentrification, which is pretty well inclined to a certain extent in what the original dictation was in terms of expansionism. But either way, it prioritizes, as far as I'm concerned, the ideal of the striving of wealth, especially with objectivism, is basically a securitization of corporate CEOs, the corporate heads, over that of working class and lower income makers who actually work for the corporations. And that is innately the principles of capitalism, for profit over the actual, over the working class, and so-called allowing for, expansion of one's wealth to trickle down with the opportunity for so-called growth within a corporation, which is really just a fancy way of saying just impressing your boss so that they could potentially give you a better living or income. Okay, and this is also where the term, as far as I'm concerned, where the distinction of neoliberal fascism comes into play, and why it actually is very prominent. So, as far as I'm concerned, capitalism needs to be recognized as a branch of fascistic economics. And in terms of republicanism, it is a subtle gray area, upper gray area, around here, somewhere in here, form of authoritarianism, basically employing subtle tactics of so-called protection of citizens of a nation, and also communal policing and mass military involvement, or mass military exercises, as well as garnering a military for protection of said nationhood in the republic, which, as far as I'm concerned, is just subtle authoritarianism, and it can be implemented by the right wing and also the left wing too, that of national statehood and republican pride, as well as could potentially as well by a centrist type ideological organization So I deem it as being part of the gray area. Oh, and capitalism is obviously far right, right over there. So there's that. 5. It needs to be recognized / regarded that the Soviet Union under Stalinism, Somalia under Mohammad Saad Barre, a Somalian politician, revolutionary military general, Equatorial Guinea under Francisco Macias Nguema, an Ecuador-Guinean politician / revolutionary, Kampuchea, modern-day Cambodia, under Pol Pot, a Cambodian politician, revolutionary, and soldier, Cuba under Fidel Castro, a Cuban politician, revolutionary, Mongolia under Pelgidin Gendin, a Mongolian politician, East Germany under Erich Honecker, a German politician and Stalinist reformer, Soviet Turkmenistan under Ivan Musalek, a Ukrainian politician, North Korea under the Kim dynasty regime, the Poktu bloodline, modern-day Norway, modern-day Sweden, modern-day Finland, modern-day Angola, modern-day Laos, modern-day Vietnam, modern-day Tibet, and China since roughly the late 1980s are not genuine examples of the eco-political ideologies of socialism and communism, the governmental political ideologies of Marxism, Egalitarianism, Leninism, Trotskyism, and Maoism, or the sociologic examination / practices of Marxist school of thought, Egalitarian school of thought, egalitarianism, equitarianism, Ho Chi Minh thought, Pan-Africanism, Pan-Arabism, Pan-Indianism / Pan-Indigenous movement, collectivism, and Luxemburgism. And that is not, we'll clarify there, that is not me defending at all Leninism or even amounts of Trotskyism in some degree, and Maoism. I'm completely against Leninism and Maoism. As far as I'm concerned, Leninism, in terms of what happened in the Soviet Union leading to Stalin's rise, the entire idea was amalgamating state capital, which was a direct quote from Lenin, of amalgamating state capitalism in order to properly so-called implement socialistic redistribution across basically the former Russian Empire, which was a complete idiotic move as far as I'm concerned, and which led the way for, as far as I'm concerned, Joseph Stalin to come in, who was a sociopathic opportunist, who came in and, from my observation and during what Stalinism entirely is, well, he turned the Soviet Union into a pseudo-capitalist, aristocratic, dictatorship. It was an aristocracy that was pseudo-capitalist. It had minimalist redistribution amongst the common people and the working class, depending on administrative district, and funneled a lot of resources towards Stalin himself and his higher executives. And either way, and as far as people want to claim the Holodomor in Ukraine was caused by the implementations of communism in the Soviet Union, well, no, it wasn't. That was actually a direct ethnic attack by Joseph Stalin on the people of Ukraine. The Ukrainian famine was instigated by the Soviet Russian government because, Ukraine was a puppet state at that time, to actually siphon away the rural farmers' food supplies for, I believe it might have been putting it towards industrial factories or just shipping it off to, Russia at the time, Soviet Russia. So it was a targeted starvation, which, by the way, that is the complete opposite of the dictated ideology that was set out by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the Communist Manifesto of redistribution of, needed resources, and also in terms of socialism of working class decisions of the manufacturing process, and also what is needed based upon each other's own needs of the resources and redistributing them based upon, what is properly, what is desired for each group, basically, or needed for a certain commune. And as far as I'm concerned, thievery of food and the necessary, land to actually produce the food is the complete opposite of what communism exactly calls for, if you actually bother to look at it. So there's that. And, where was I? Oh, yes, here. 6, it needs to be recognized / regarded that as the current point in humanity's history, globally, we have not come anywhere close to even entering a post-colonial era across a multitude of civilizations on this planet, as the thievery of land and natural resources, cultural assimilation / degradation, and defamation of collectivist tribal systems of operation still aggressively persist to this day. This is based upon the notion that you can absolutely not do capitalism without racism, in terms of especially indigenous racism and Pan-African racism. You cannot do it, as well as also nomadic peoples of the Middle East. It's impossible. Most of the tribal traditions from many years, for millennia of evidence of anthropology, functioned in collectivist methods. And as far as I'm concerned, from historical evidence, we lived, humanity, in large portions of many different colonies across the globe, and different tribal colonies as well. Basically, we lived in pseudo forms of anarchism and socialism. We lived in pseudo forms of anarchism and communism, pseudo-communism and pseudo-anarchism widely across the board, which was mainly redistribution methods from tribal councils at times, or depending on the colony, of collective, just basic pseudo, even I guess in some form, pseudo-democracy, before it came into a popular idea within, I believe, I don't know what era of Greece the actual the principles were outlined of democracy and democratic rule. Okay, so where are we now? 7, it needs to be recognized / regarded that as of the current point in humanity's history, globally, we are living in an era of new wave corporate advertising schemes and mass corporate performative activism propaganda, 2 simultaneous sociological phenomenons I'm dubbing it to be neo-advertisement agendaism and neo-commercialist advertism. So let me just explain quickly what those two are. So neo-advertisement agendaism, as far as I'm concerned, is mass corporate propaganda, that is commercials on television that basically try to be overly quirky and overly relatable, as far as I'm concerned, to say, well, just the more nihilistic and absurdist humor that's been coming out of the 2010s era. Basically, corporations trying to actually, well, seem as if they are comedically inclined towards, like, part of the inside joke, or that they understand where the humor of absurdism or absurdist humor amongst most of Gen Z actually comes from, without realizing that most of the humor is directed at, well, the problematic cultural and sociological issues that we have to face daily. As well as in terms of neo-commercialist advertism is basically, well, performative activism in advertising, portraying it as if mega corporations to moderate corporations are sympathetic or have a great understanding of the struggles that everyday working class people, or people of marginalized racial groups or sexuality orientations, genders, or of religious, well, identities, as if they know their struggle, or as if they don't in some way, portraying it as if they don't in some way contribute to it with their amalgamation of mass wealth and lobbying for, well, political, well, influence to put laws in place that will protect their own interests, and also degrade cultures that are seen as, well, unfavorable in a lot of the, well, in the Eurocentric world, in the predominantly white world, is seen as, well, non-Eurocentric, and also as well as the fact that basically putting in place methods to try and prevent actual cultural ideals of, I would argue, more collectivist thought, which is, well, widespread, especially as well in white ethnicities across Eastern Europe and also Central Europe by smaller ethnicities, that well, it's a complete defamation and degradation to try and, well, destroy it and destroy any ideals towards that against their, well, their economic agenda. So they utilize commercial advertising for this performative activism to seem as if they are on the side of the working class, for the sole purpose of mass corporate profiteering and ranking up as much profit as possible to manipulate people into thinking that they are trustworthy, and actually garnering more and more, well, basically, well, consumerist appeal to people who are actually struggling under these, well, oppressive systems that they create. 8, it needs to be recognized / regarded that the ideologies of capitalism, blatant fascism, neo-Nazism, neo-Nazism, Hitlerianism, Stalinism, and Leninism, and most and most beliefs of racial superiorization across the board, no matter an individual's heritage, evolved out of and are inherently rooted in the practices and moral principles of feudalism and Eurocentrism. 9. It needs to be recognized / regarded that an individual member or collective organization of any racial background, encompassing skin color, ethnicity, culture, and spirituality, can be racially prejudiced towards another racial group regardless of historical context. That is not by any means an excuse to negate the history of and lasting relevant sociological oppression of said different groups of people. So as far as I'm concerned, the whole Black people or Latino people or East Asian people cannot be racist because of the historical oppression put onto them, is not true in the slightest, given in the contextual definition of race being in combination of skin tone as well as the cultural heritage and background of the different ethnicities. Well, then yes, those all absolutely apply to white demographics as well, and a variety of other demographics who have been sadly the oppressors over a lot of history. But still, by that definition, anyone of any racial background can be racist, can be racially prejudiced. Needed implementations in philosophy. In my opinion, as a current, these are imperative and urgently need to be understood for the progression of this field. 1. It needs to be recognized that philosophy in its entirety, including ontology, epistemology, ethics/morality, axiology, phenomenology, aesthetics, and metaphysics, is a legitimate field of scientific research and is inherent in every facet of life across the board, along with humanity's understanding of the very fabric of existence. I don't see how this is even a debate anymore. I know there's mass skepticism in so much of the other fields of science, other scientific specialists who don't regard philosophy as being a genuine form of science and more as just skepticism, or like more of just intangible theories, even though that's the entirety of what science is initially based on, is hypotheses and things of the sort, and examination of the realms of existence. So it's completely ridiculous that even people who just average everyday people who actually study philosophy themselves, even they don't regard it as a genuine science. It's similar to how psychology is in many regards not regarded as a genuine science because of its metaphysical properties, and also not regarded as being a subspecialty of neurology, even though it is the entire psychological state is headed by our central nervous systems. It's controlled by our different neural cortexes, more specifically the frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, striatum, the frontotemporal region, the temporal lobe. The occipital also plays a part in it as well in terms of dreaming, regulation and mental synthesis and imagination. And as well as in some regards as well, the thalamus can play a part in it. The hypothalamus as well, nuclei such as the nucleus accumbens, and the Raphael nuclei in terms of sexual arousal, and you get the gist of what I'm saying. You know, it as far as I'm concerned, and from what it evolved out of, psychology evolved out of neurology as far as I'm concerned, and the encompassing aspects of ontology from philosophy. That's where it came out of, understanding the emotional projections of our nervous systems and how it affects the social environments that we are in. And it also evolved out of another bit of history, what is a discredited science by this point, of phrenology, which thank God it is, because it was basically a science back in the pre-psychology. It was neurologists basically thought of the idea of measuring skull size to determine certain personality and mentality characteristics, which I think you can see why that was discredited after the Nazi regime and Eurogenics basically evolving in some form, sadly, out of that discredited science of phrenology. But either way, it was it predated psychology in neurological science. 2. It needs to be 2. In specific relation to epistemology, it needs to be recognized / regarded that there are 3 distinctive variables to a person's cognitive intellectual processing of a provably problematic and disruptive belief system. One, they either follow in the principles of an adopted philosophy/ideology out of maliciousness to purely induce total satisfaction for their own self-benefactor. Two, they follow in the principles of an adopted philosophy/ideology because they have been indoctrinated into its core ideals from societal, interpersonal, and cultural influences/trauma, operating in a herd mentality. Or three, they follow in the principles of an adopted philosophy/ideology because they've utilized critical thinking skills and analysis in an attempt at discerning opinions for themselves, but have unfortunately come to very poor conclusions. As far as I'm concerned, those are, well, the three elements. That's how life presents itself, how human beings' cognitive states in terms of intellectual thought and epistemological research, those are the three ways it presents. Either psychological disorders knowing of purposely going towards these ideologies just for malicious intent, for their own complete egotistical gratification, indoctrination, and they just think, well, that's just what you do, that's what everybody does, or they've critically thought, but tried to induce critically thought, but it's come to very poor conclusions, and they've, well, been wrong completely. And three, it needs to be recognized/regarded that the only reason the conceptual understanding and categorization of metaphysicalism even exists and was conceived in the first place is because we as human beings have not had, do not currently have, and most likely never will have the neuropsychological ability to fully, vocally, literally, or expressionally articulate our internal desires and turmoils to truly satisfying maximal extent, or properly articulate the encompassing ontologic, axiologic, epistemologic, moralistic, phenomenologic, and aesthetic properties of our shared socialization and surrounding physical environments. So those are what I feel to be needed implementations in all those fields. Now I'm going to throw in quickly here the, I'm going to throw in quickly two theories that I forgot to print off. And also I don't have time to edit this video, so there's not going to be any cards on here. With this one, and when I have time to, all the ones previous to this, I'm going to post what I have done as I finish them. I'm going to post the writings of my theories in the comments section, pin them, and because I'm not going to be able to at all post them in the descriptions. I don't think there's going to be enough room. At some point I will put timestamps in the descriptions of, well, the videos I've uploaded for this series. But as for this one, I may put this one in the description, I'm not sure. But I'll see. But I will continuously be updating them. Anyway, so the other theories being intrinsic moral practicality is what I'm calling this one, and this is ethics, is philosophy dealing with ethics and ontology. Basically, I submit the following conclusion, that morality by its nature is practical. Morality is quite literally what human beings see as being right and wrong to do in a social behavioral setting, or culturally what should be adhered to in some facet or ideologically. And practicality is what is a effective means of getting something put into place and actually, well, getting it implemented in something and having it work to a beneficial extent. By this notion, as far as I'm concerned, anything that that a person condones morally, that they support, that they endorse, is a practical condonement of social behavior. So by this notion, morality is practical, as you are condoning something of how you feel human beings should actually socially engage with one another on a, well, as far as I'm concerned, practical basis. I don't have another word for it right now in terms of socialization, as an effective means of, well, in terms of however you try and implement that morality, of, well, getting people to actually behave in that way, whether it's talking, whether it's through brute force, whether it's just through manipulation, whether it's to whatever extent. it's still what you deem to be, in essence, a socially practical means of interaction. So, as far as I'm concerned, morality is innately practical. Though, to clarify, I don't think practicality is innately moral. That's a little confusing, I know, maybe a bit contrary. But just because something is practical in terms of, I guess, a physical sense, that doesn't automatically mean that it's morally sound or it's morally beneficial to do. But I do believe the reverse is possible, where morality is absolutely in all facets practical in terms of just human conceptualization of what practicality is. And in terms of the other theory, it's the paradox of pessimism. So basically, if you know the philosophy of pessimism, it dictates the idea that this world is completely detrimental for the most part, and most things will remain stagnate in terms of not actually seeing any true progression of any beneficial means, or even to some extent in a, well, I guess, not a severe form of pragmatism, that things will just relatively stay moot or stagnate. It's not going to progress any further, even if it's not wholly detrimental. But in terms of this, well, the initial idea outlined by Arthur Schopenhauer, which I heavily disagree with his philosophy outright, absolutely. The idea is, this idea is that, well, if pessimism is the idea that things will not truly progress or see any real change and remain stagnate, and if someone was to, in terms of, if they were to have, see some amount of beneficial thing or an enjoyment of something, which has been outlined, which actually Arthur Schopenhauer outlined about his idea of building, I forget what the metaphysical example he gave, of building like this invisible box around your, well, little crafted social grounds, and basically your own ideal world, basically, to shield yourself from it. So by that notion, he must have believed that there was some amount of things that he enjoyed in this life that were worthy of being shielded from the outside world. So by that notion, though, of pessimism, if that there is things that are genuinely beneficial, or at the very least bring some amount of pleasure in life, well, that would make them to some degree beneficial. And at the very least, in terms of the stagnation, it's not a matter of, well, it's not detrimental. It will, these beneficial things, if you have them, will never actually change. So it's not that that destruction or problematic issues will prevail overall. It's that if things may remain stagnate, then by that notion, the beneficial things in life will also remain stagnate and will never change, even if it's just one solitary, really nice and pleasurable thing. So yeah, I know I didn't go in as much depth with those two philosophies here, but I think I've talked about the gist of them a lot on my channel so far. So anyway, yeah, that's it. Those are my contributions as of right now to the whole of the scientific community. Please, as I've asked, just review these, critically think about them for yourself, and let me know your thoughts on all of these. Please share these videos with anyone that you possibly can. Please, just to get them thinking about these. You don't have to, if you have proof, obviously you're entitled to your own opinion, and if you have genuine counterpoints to this, to any of these theories, I would like to hear them. And if I can't debunk them, then that means, well, obviously that point of the theory was wrong. So I would love to hear it. And, well, to anyone who has watched all 5 of these videos now full through, I'm incredibly thankful. And well, it's a little surreal right now, because it's been a wild 6 months here in Ottawa. Wild 6 months. It's been nearly 11 months since I left Toronto, and I've been packing up here all day. and well, all night as well, while I was taking breaks in between at points when recording these. I have not gotten a wink of sleep. So, well, I hope you found some merit in these. And now I will be on a new adventure into the Canadian province of Quebec. First, trying to reach the city of Laval. I will be bringing, obviously, all my theories with me that I printed off, and I will be trying to mail other forms of them that I printed off to certain specialists that I was going to cite in these, but I will do that in the comments whenever I continue to update them. So, yeah. Oh, and on top of that as well, I have kind of decided, considering by this point, well, I'm not entirely consciously stressed about my financial situation. There were points where it got a little worrisome, somewhat. Remember back when I was in the countryside in Crow's Landing, I said in videos that I wasn't afraid of being moneyless, but I was afraid of being moneyless out in the middle of nowhere. Well, I guess maybe I was in a bit of denial. But by this point, I have a new philosophy to life in terms of financial gain under the oppressive systems we live in economically. I'm going there, wherever I'm going, to lose money over there, and then I'm going to gain some form of a job to make back payment that I had lost, and then I'm going to go somewhere else just to lose the money again. And I'm going to go here to lose it again and then gain it back, and here to lose it again and gain it back. That's a calming thought to me. I don't know if that helps anyone out there in terms of their financial stresses, but, well, I hope it does in some way. Oh, and as well as the fact, considering where my finances are right now, the average, well, obviously I'm impoverished, but stable enough at this point, I have decided that, considering I was here originally trying to get into strip dancing in terms of applying to strip clubs, which I may also do in Quebec City once I reach it, if I reach it in one piece, but as well as that, I have decided that I will start up my pornographic career, mainly on the fact of, again, just being a solo model, and just as of right now, I only have a Pornhub account to upload to. I thought of potentially going to some other indie sites that, well, it's a bit of a moral dilemma. I don't want to charge for my erotic work, but most of the indie sites, obviously, a portion, they have to actually demand that their performers, for certain amounts of videos, do actually put it behind a paywall, which, well, I don't want to do. And in terms of mega monopoly capitalist, ultra-capitalist, commercialist companies, I hate Pornhub, and I hate OnlyFans. They are the sex work definitions of mass commercialism and mass corporate profit. Mass. And they absolutely try, and they over-fetishize so much of their sites and over-sexualize things and push very much over-sexualizing entertainment from larger studios within the industries just to, like, prey upon people's interactive loneliness, as far as I'm concerned, and also if they have gained conscious loneliness and their wants to absolve, like consciously absolve said loneliness, which I think is sick. So, but, well, as I've said before, we're all hypocrites to major extents, and I have no good solution for that. That relates to my theory of the paradox of existence as a whole. How in almost every conceivable construct, when we get down to it, life is completely contrary. Another thing that I didn't mention actually in the video before this, when talking about the paradox of existence, one of the major factors towards that, I believe, in terms of the paradox of, the paradoxical nature of everything, some extent, to every extent, literally, is because of one of it is because of our limits of articulation. As I mentioned in the implementations of philosophy for metaphysicalism, we quite literally only consider things metaphysical because we do not have the actual vocal articulation or expressive communicative ability to actually display our truest, deepest. We don't. It's unattainable, at least as of right now in human evolution, to do so. And that opens up the ethical question, if it was to ever, in terms of maybe machinery, be possible, would we want to do that? So, by the way, as well as an add-on to my theory of interactive loneliness, if we were ever to create a machine that actually could genuinely read into people's minds, and we could understand their entire feelings and desires and emotional boundaries, and breaking the boundaries of our emotional states, that's still interactive loneliness. You're still trying to cope with your own loneliness by trying to understand someone else's loneliness, by literally creating a machine that can peer into someone's into the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, potentially. So even then, the theory of interactive loneliness, as far as I'm concerned, holds up with it. But, anyway, I'll probably start doing, pornographic work and uploading to Pornhub when I can, probably when I get ways away into Quebec. Not anytime, very soon. Not anytime. Not soon in, maybe not the... Well, I don't know. This depends on, how fast I reach Laval and Montreal and Longueuil. But maybe when I get closer to Lévis and Quebec City. I don't know. I'll probably do some nature, videos, because, I personally do have a bit of a nature fetish. Not obviously over fetishization with it, but also the fact that I don't think I will have literally anywhere else to do it, because I will be being semi-homeless. I might become fully homeless once leaving the city of Ottawa. I have no clue. But, that all remains to be seen. Oh, yes. And as for what I said earlier a few months ago, in my "Are you not just doing the same thing? I'm not killing myself until I find out" video, about me, being a nudist, and also wanting to get naked on camera and talk about nudism and just a variety of other things pertaining to non-sexual nudity, and talking about the essence of nudity in general. Obviously, because of issues right now, that's had to be postponed until I get out of Ottawa and some amount of distance into Quebec and figure out what I'm going to do, and obviously when the weather warms up more so. But that's all going to wait. And that's that. Oh, and one more thing. If you're wondering why I said when I went to the Canada district and when I was also in Alta Vista in the western half of Ottawa, I said that I had decided to leave on March 31st. Well, that also got postponed because of a snowstorm that blew in overnight. So now I will be leaving today on April 2nd. So, yeah, I'll upload this and then I'll get going. Goodbye, Ottawa. It has been very, very interesting. There were many incredible moments I can't deny, and there were also many very, very terrible moments. But overall, it was a pleasantly interesting mixed bag. And as you can tell from all the videos I just posted, I learned a lot. I will show my diagrams one more time for people to pause and, well, if they want to look them over and review them just for their own knowledge and understanding, and then I will sign off. I will see you in Gatineau, Quebec.